My name is Zachary Ingram, and today we're going to talk about Piaget and some of his contributions to education and his contributions to intelligence and how we acquire it. So let's just go and go into a pretty broad overview of just what genetic epistemiology is. This is going to be the origins and the framework of thinking. Just a big word, fancy word that just means the study of how we think and why we think in these certain different ways. And one of those main things that we actually think about is going to be our cognitive development. So if we look right over here, this thing is kind of glitchy here. Okay, so cognitive development, the best way to think about this is throughout adolescence, you're going to start accruing schemas or experiences. And the more schemas or experiences that you have, the more intelligence that you're actually gaining. And that's just like the most basic general overview of it, and we're actually going to see how we progress through as we look down on this map a little bit more. So what's important is that schemas build on top of each other. So think of them as building blocks in a Lego set or in a building. Each experience or each stimulus that you encounter is going to build upon all of the other experiences, so you're going to have a more robust intelligence surrounding those particular events or whatever. So schemas are going to be directly related to this triad of assimilation, accommodation, and equilibration. So let's start over here with accommodation. Accommodation is actually going to be where you encounter a certain stimulus or a certain event or experience to where you have insufficient knowledge. So the schemas and the building blocks that you have are not going to cut it. So now you are faced with having to learn and having to build new blocks and develop more schemas. And once you've built those blocks and you are comfortable and now you're confident in your abilities, that's when you transition over into assimilation. And that's basically where you are comfortable with the situation that you're in, and you're good to go. Right? You don't feel the need to have to challenge yourself and get out of that uncomfortable state. Right? So a good way to think about this is when riding a bike. Right? So when you first learn to ride a bike, you're having to use accommodation. You're having to learn the steps of balancing and pedaling all at the same time. But after some practice, you then transition into assimilation, where you are more comfortable and you feel confident in your abilities. And this whole interaction between those two is actually going to be equilibration. Is going to be that driving force that moves you from accommodation into assimilation. This entire trifecta happening is going to be really important for accruing knowledge and accruing different types of intelligence throughout your adolescence and even further on into adulthood as well. So let's scroll back up into here so we can see how that actually plays out within, what are some milestones within cognitive development that we want to try to hit. So up here, these are going to be certain stages that in adolescence you're going to move through. And as you move, you're going to be kind of developing more because you're going to have more of those past experiences. Remember, cognitive development is all about as your intelligence is gauged off of your experiences. And so the more experiences you have, the more intelligence that you are accruing. So starting over here, we have the sensory motor stage, where you have from birth to about 2 years old. And now we're going to have years scattered between these 4 different stages. Don't pay too much attention to them. They're just rough guidelines. They're definitely not hard rules. They're just kind of like landmarks that children should be kind of fitting into. So from 0 to 2 years old, you're going to want to try to recognize object permanence, which is an object still exists even if it's hidden or out of view, right? So if I have a ball and I show it to a toddler in this case, and they recognize the ball, once I put that ball away, that ball is not that ball is still existing in the space. It just happens to be out of the field of view. So if you can get there, that's kind of one of those initial check marks that the schemas are actually going to be able to build towards. And then following that, we have the pre-operational. This is basically where children start recognizing the words have symbolic meaning, right? So apples are actually the name of that shiny red thing over there that you eat for lunch, right? It means that words actually have a direct meaning to them, and they could be tied to something more symbolic than just the actual arrangement of letters. And then you transition into the concrete operational stage. That's where, from about 7 to 11 years old, you start exhibiting forms of logic, right? So operational thought, you really start being able to work through different problems, but you're able to do them in your head rather than needing some sort of tactile or physical representation of it, right? You don't have to count on your fingers. You can start thinking about it in your head, and you don't have to necessarily have some sort of physical manifestation of a problem. You can start working those sorts of things out in your brain instead. And following right up here, we have a formal operational. That's basically about 11 years old and above. You're going to start being able to make conclusive and abstract thinking. So you're going to be able to start testing hypotheses. You're going to be able to think about outcomes and think critically about things, and really transition into much more mature ways of intelligence. Now, what's important is that Piaget made a comment that you don't get to skip any of these stages, but you don't necessarily reach all of them. So somebody that may be suffering from some sort of delay may be stuck at some of these previous stages and will not progress into some of those more advanced stages like formal operational. But he did make it very clear that it is impossible to skip stages. One of his other important theories is going to be zone of proximal development, ZPD. Basically, that's just going to be this period of time, this window in which an adult intervention is actually going to be productive for a child's development and a child's in intelligence, and it will actually help them with retaining information, but also initial comprehension. So there's this thing called the line of natural regression. Basically, after you learn something, you have there's always going to be a forgetful period, right? So after you learn a lesson about your times tables and you go on winter break, you come back, that intelligence that was way up here because you were proficient at it has actually fallen back, and so now you are less than where we left off. So that's kind of it's a problem that schools have been plagued with ever since summer vacation's been an issue, right? So since it's been instituted. So this point in which knowledge falls into that point. The zone of proximal development, when the adult comes in, it's actually to try to intersect so that you don't fall back as far as you would without the adult intervention. That process of trying to make sure that you don't fall back as far is going to be scaffolding. It's a loose colloquial term that basically means that it is and I'm sure you guys are familiar with what a scaffolding is. It not only strengthens the excuse me. Not only does it strengthen the educational process and the learning process itself on the way up, but also it prevents extreme backsliding. So basically, if you learn X amount of things and you're going to forget some of them, scaffolding is actually going to prevent you from forgetting as much, and it should be able to support you so you don't have to necessarily relearn all these things over and over again. So over here we have cultural tools. So cultural tools are basically going to be non-traditional, non-personal forms of education. That could be books, that could be videos, that could be watching something happen across the street. Any form in which you are not directly being educated by a professional or by a person not telling you and educating you, that's a form of cultural tools. And those obviously change between different areas and different cultures, but they're really important to the foundational education that adolescents encounter. And it's crucial that we still use and emphasize those tools as well. So the big thing we want to take away from the zone of proximal development is that there is this crucial window to where an adult intervening is going to be more productive than in a more traditional sense of the cognitive development or a discovery theory, right? where you would just randomly encounter your environment, or maybe a structural encounter of your environment to where you have to discover things that are going to be educational to you, or discover knowledge. While in the zone of proximal development, that's going to be where it's a much more strict parameters, and the adult is going to come in and actually help guide and help facilitate the discovery of knowledge. So both of them are valid ways of looking at it, and just how they interact with each other changes depending on the environment. Well, thank you so much, and look forward to some feedback.